For over a century, the question of who the first Americans were and how they got here has haunted archaeologists. The traditional story told us they came across a land bridge from Siberia some 13,000 years ago, chasing mammoths in survival. But a new genetic discovery has shattered that theory completely. Deep inside an ancient burial site, scientists have found the oldest DNA ever recovered from the Americas, and what it reveals rewrites not just American history, but the story of humanity itself. Because the genes of these first settlers tell a story far older, far stranger, and far more connected than anyone ever imagined. Their DNA doesn't just trace where they came from, it hints at why they came, and who they may have truly been. The story begins in a remote valley in central Alaska. There, buried beneath layers of permafrost, archaeologists discovered the tiny remains of an infant, a girl who lived more than 11,500 years ago. Her grave was delicate, wrapped in ochre, her bones so fragile that even touching them risked destruction. But her DNA survived. When scientists sequenced her genome, they realized she belonged to a completely unknown population, one that existed before all known Native American groups. They named her lineage the ancient Beringians. This discovery was groundbreaking. For decades, scientists believed the first Americans were descendants of a single migration from Siberia. But this child's DNA showed something different. Her people had split from other Asian ancestors long before anyone crossed the Bering Land Bridge. She wasn't just part of the story. She was the missing chapter, the genetic bridge between continents, the key to a forgotten migration that predates everything we thought we knew. And what her genome revealed next left even the experts in disbelief. When geneticists compared the infant's DNA with those of modern Native American tribes, they noticed something strange. Only part of her genetic code matched. The rest belonged to a completely unknown lineage, one that no longer exists in any living population. They called it a ghost population, a people lost to time, whose DNA lingers like a shadow in the genomes of later generations. These ghost populations weren't just theoretical. They appeared across the Americas, in the genes of ancient remains from Montana, Brazil, and even Patagonia. This meant there had been multiple migrations into the Americas, not one. Some came through the icy land bridge from Siberia, but others may have traveled by sea, hugging the Pacific coast long before the glaciers melted. The first Americans weren't a single people. They were a mosaic, a collision of tribes, explorers, and survivors. And hidden within that genetic chaos is evidence that the Americas may have been inhabited thousands of years earlier than anyone ever dared to believe. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In 2015, researchers sequenced DNA from a 10,400-year-old skeleton found in Brazil, known as Luzia, one of the oldest human remains in the Americas. Her facial features looked nothing like those of Siberian migrants, and her DNA confirmed why. Lucia's genome contained markers found in ancient Australo-Melanesian populations, people from Southeast Asia and Oceania, separated from the Americas by thousands of miles of ocean. It was a genetic impossibility. How could a woman in prehistoric Brazil share ancestry with populations from across the Pacific? The finding was so controversial that many scientists rejected it outright. But new studies using next-generation sequencing have since confirmed it. Small traces of Australo-Melanesian ancestry appear in the DNA of some early South American remains. This means that an ancient migration may have crossed the Pacific, long before the Siberian ancestors of Native Americans even set foot on the continent. For the first time, DNA had revealed the unimaginable, that the first Americans may not have come from one place or even one direction. If the story ended there, it would already rewrite human history. But the discoveries buried under the Arctic ice told an even darker and more complex tale. In the frozen soils of the Yukon and Alaska, scientists unearthed fragments of environmental DNA, not from skeletons, but from the Earth itself. These samples contained microscopic traces of ancient humans dating back as far as 20,000 years, long before the official timeline of migration. This meant that small bands of humans may have been living in the Americas while glaciers still covered most of the continent, surviving in isolation, cut off from the rest of the world for thousands of years. When the ice finally retreated, these early settlers likely mixed with later arrivals, Siberians, coastal voyagers, and others we've yet to identify, creating the diverse genetic tapestry we now call the first Americans. But one mystery remains. If people were already here before the Great Migration, who were they? And where did they come from? In 1968, near a riverbed in Montana, construction workers stumbled upon the grave of a small child. The burial was simple: a few tools, a shell ornament, and a faint dusting of red ochre. For decades, it lay quietly in museum storage, forgotten. Then, in 2014, geneticists sequenced his DNA. The results stunned the world. This 12,600-year-old boy, known as the Anzac child, carried genetic markers that connected him directly to modern Native American populations, from Alaska all the way to South America. It was the missing link. The Anzac child proved that the early inhabitants of North and South America were part of the same ancient lineage, descendants of people who had crossed from Asia, but who had already begun to diversify as they spread across two continents. But his DNA also revealed something else: a deep ancestral split, showing that soon after their arrival, one branch of these early settlers migrated south and disappeared for thousands of years, evolving into genetically distinct populations. The Anzac genome didn't just confirm who the first Americans were, it showed how they became the people of the Americas. And that realization forced scientists to confront an uncomfortable question. If his ancestors reached South America so early, how fast and how far had humans truly spread? To answer that question, researchers turned to an unlikely source: the ancient skeletons of Lagoa Santa, a cave system deep within Brazil. These remains, dated to more than 12,000 years ago, showed facial features unlike any modern Native American: narrow faces, high cheekbones, and elongated skulls. When scientists extracted DNA from these ancient bones, they found something extraordinary. These people were indeed related to the first North Americans, but they also carried genetic traces of a now extinct population that appeared nowhere else on Earth. Some call them the Paleo-Americans, an enigmatic group whose lineage vanished without a trace. Their DNA hints at a forgotten migration, perhaps from a coastal route long erased by rising seas. It's possible that these Paleo-Americans were the first true pioneers of the Americas, explorers who arrived thousands of years before the great ice sheets melted, before any land bridge opened, before history began. If that's true, then the first footsteps on American soil may not have come from Siberia at all, but from the edges of an ancient ocean world now lost to time. The more scientists looked, the stranger the data became. In a recent study, geneticists examining remains from South America discovered faint traces of Australo-Melanesian DNA, the same markers found in people from the Pacific Islands in Australia. This shouldn't have been possible. These two regions are separated by over 10,000 miles of open ocean. Yet the evidence was undeniable: a small fragment of DNA linking ancient South Americans to populations from across the Pacific. Could it be coincidence, contamination, or something else entirely? Some researchers now believe that these traces could point to a prehistoric transoceanic migration long before Polynesians mastered navigation. Perhaps small groups of seafarers, pushed by storms or guided by currents, reached the western shores of the Americas tens of thousands of years ago. If true, it would mean that humans reached the Americas not once, but multiple times, from multiple directions, rewriting the entire timeline of human exploration. What we thought was a straight line from Asia to America now looks more like a web, a global network of migrations, converging on a continent that was never as isolated as we believed. The final piece of the puzzle came from a cave in northern Mexico. Inside, researchers found fragments of DNA embedded in ancient sediment, not from bones, but from the soil itself. These genetic traces dated back more than 23,000 years. That's nearly 10,000 years before the earliest accepted human remains in the Americas. The DNA matched early Native American lineages, suggesting that humans were already living in the continent's interior, while massive ice sheets still covered most of the north. This meant that the Americas may have been settled long before the end of the last ice age, by people who somehow found a way through or around the frozen barrier. It also suggests that for thousands of years, these early humans lived in near total isolation, trapped between the glaciers and the sea, surviving in the shadows of a frozen world. And when the ice finally melted, they spread south, carrying with them not just tools and fire, but the memories of a world no one else would ever see again. Their DNA, buried in caves, in soil, in the bones of forgotten children, tells a story not of conquest, but of endurance. A story that begins not with discovery, but with survival. Reflecting on these discoveries, one truth becomes clear. The story of the first Americans is not a straight line. It's a vast and tangled web connecting every corner of the earth. For generations, we were taught that the Americas were the final frontier of human migration, that a single group of hunters crossed a frozen bridge and became the ancestors of all who followed. But DNA has shattered that myth. It reveals a deeper, older story, one of multiple journeys, countless crossings, and a shared human hunger to explore beyond the horizon. The genes found in the bones of an Alaskan child, in the soil of a Mexican cave, and in the skulls of Brazil's forgotten dead tell a single message across thousands of years. Humanity was never divided, only distant. We are the descendants of wanderers, people who braved oceans, glaciers, and unimaginable hardships, driven by curiosity and survival. And though their names are lost, their DNA endures, a biological memory of courage written in every one of us. These findings don't just change what we know about how the Americas were settled, they change who we believe we are. They prove that history isn't made by nations or empires, but by families, by travelers, by the restless spirit that defines our species. The first Americans were not the beginning of something new. They were the continuation of something eternal. The same flame that carried their ancestors out of Africa still burns within us. And as science continues to dig through the soil of time, each fragment of ancient DNA reminds us that humanity's greatest story, our own, is still being written. If you want to uncover more of the secrets hidden in ancient DNA, the forgotten migrations, lost civilizations, and discoveries that are rewriting human history, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Because the next revelation might not just change what we know about the past, it might redefine the future of us all.